Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Jason Brandt, Managing Partner and Commercial Officer for Stagwell Technologies. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Simon Nuss, Vice President of Data Solutions at Hitachi Solutions Canada. Hey, Simon, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be here, Jason. Thank you.
Because you speak to quite a few industries, I'm assuming, are there any industries or verticals that are better or worse at this notion of the organization, the capturing, the securing of the data? It's long been theorized that the pharmaceutical industry is slightly behind these areas, say where financial services is paving the way, but these could be myths. Do you have an opinion on this?
I mean, I do, but it's very subjective and it's definitely not empirical. So this is from my own experiences.
Of course.
Investment funds, especially on the capital market side, usually very data driven, very good at gathering, organizing, and analyzing. SaaS shops, so an organization whose whole revenue is driven by a product, they usually have a pretty good stranglehold on that product and sort of the analysis around it. Organizations that handle large infrastructure, like nuclear power plants, they have large, sophisticated PMO offices. They need to run their data on business. Wow. I mean, I wouldn't like to know there's a nuclear power plant near me that isn't monitoring safety, for example.
Of course.
An investment fund can't do their job without having access to a Bloomberg terminal, things like that. So, when I look at the consistency amongst these industries and these types of companies, I think their operations are data-driven. So that's an important distinction. I think any organization / industry whose operations are data-driven, they're just naturally that's just naturally going to create a data-driven culture. So that's sort of my opinion on some of the industries. But once again, very subjective.
Of course. That's great. Okay. Would love just, 1-2 sentences on your take on the terms for our listeners and who may not be as comfortable or would like to have, a little bit of crib notes, I suppose, on this type of thing. So we'll just go through them one by one as I've taken notes. The first one is Databricks.
Databricks is the most advanced end-to-end data platform on the market today. Imagine writing 3 different programming languages at once and having them execute very efficiently under one query plan. That's quite a technical answer, but that concept is brilliant and it doesn't exist in any other tool, really. Databricks is open source for the most part, and it is that lakehouse architecture, which I'm hoping is one of the questions. So I can use a non-Databricks engine to query my Databricks data. It's brilliant.
Perfect. Okay. Data mesh.
How much time do we have? So data mesh is a decentralized approach to data and analytics. So we've all spent our careers fighting against shadow IT, right? Trying to squash people using all these tools and methodologies and everything. Conversely, data mesh says, well, we know shadow IT exists and it exists for a reason, normally because IT is a bottleneck. So instead of fighting shadow IT, data mesh basically says, let's embrace it. Let's establish guardrails for the business to do what they want with the tools they want, the way that they want, so long as they're achieving their own objectives. So it's a very decentralized way. I don't want to say loose, but a very decentralized sort of loose way of managing data analytics within some very strict guardrails to ensure that, your HR department using one tool can talk to your finance department using another.
I love it. That's a great answer. Microservices.
They fall more on the application side. So we don't generally do a microservice. It's an architecture. It's a way to deploy your tools in a very compartmentalized, atomic way. That's what a microservice is. We generally don't do that on the analytics side. It's more on the application side, as I said. Data mesh, though, actually draws quite heavily from some of these microservice methodologies or approaches. So.
Perfect. Okay, 2 that go hand in hand. First is data lake.
Data lake, it's files and folders. If anyone tells you anything else, they're lying.
And data lake house.
Data lakehouse. All right, so that's bigger. So yes, maybe I can steal an extra minute or 2 on this one, actually.
Please.
So I'll cover sort of the history of data warehousing. Wow, a minute for that. So there's been three big shifts in the history of data warehousing in the last 40 years. Up until 2010, we had what was called the first generation of data warehouses. And that meant that we'd connect to a source system, we'd ETL or transform the data in transit, then load the results to a SQL server or a data warehouse. The problem with that approach is that we couldn't handle unstructured data like images or videos. So enter the second generation circa 2010. And the second generation of data warehouses is identical to the first generation, except we added a data lake. That's it. And so now we can store all this unstructured data and process it. And I like to describe this second generation as we move our compute our data to the compute. So we're still loading all this data to a data lake, and then we're loading it again to a data warehouse. So we're moving our data from the data lake to our compute or our data warehouse. And then to the question, what is lakehouse? Lakehouse is the third generation. And so I like to describe it as we move our compute, like SQL Server, to our data. And so what that means is that your data lake is the end of the line. Once your data is loaded there, it doesn't exit. It doesn't get copied and duplicated to another database. That doesn't happen. In fact, your data lake is your database. And that's how you should think of Lakehouse. And why this is really novel is that, as I mentioned, a data lake is just files and folders. And so if you've got all of your databases, Excel files for argument's sake, that means anyone can query that data with any tool that they want. It's not stored in Excel. It's stored in Apache Iceberg. It's stored in Iceberg or Delta Lake. But yeah, so that's what Lakehouse is. Open file storage of all of your data, everything. It's not copied anywhere else, which means you can use any tool to query your data. You're not vendor locked.
Perfect. And two more, which I think you're also very passionate about. Data engineer versus data scientist.
So data engineers, very process oriented, very platform focused. They're all about pipelines. They're all about the flow of data. They're usually a bit of a jack of all trades. Languages, they're familiar with SQL, they're familiar with Python, maybe a bit of PowerShell, and quite well ingrained in the DevOps processes. So handling dev test prod and the promotion between those different environments. Data scientist, very project focused, more of a business facing role, less of a support role. They're statisticians effectively who deal with data. And a lot of them are quite specialized as well. They would have a bias towards NLP for argument's sake. And their language is less on the SQL side, more on the Python and the R side. So those statistical languages.
Amazing. So Simon, thank you so much. Any last comments or any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as it was mentioned earlier, Microsoft Fabric, something for everyone to keep an eye on, I think, over the next couple of years. It's currently the only end-to-end open lakehouse platform on the market. And when Microsoft made the announcement very recently, it rattled Snowflake and Databricks. So I've got a keen eye on that to see how that's going to evolve. More importantly, how it's going to affect Snowflake and Databricks. We've discussed quite a few concepts here. I think the most important ones, if you're not already familiar, are data mesh and lakehouse. So lakehouse is here today. It's dominating the industry. As I said, Databricks is already lakehouse. Fabric is already lakehouse, and Snowflake is trying to be lakehouse. Okay, so that's where the industry is at today. Data mesh is a little bit conceptual right now. So it's going to be a slow burn in the next 10 years, but there are some fantastic principles in it for data governance. So definitely be aware of what data mesh is and how that story unfolds quite slowly. And I think the last thing is, look, if you have any questions, reach out to me over LinkedIn, connect with me, shoot me a note. I'm more than happy to deep dive into these topics with you or your organization.
Amazing. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. Really informative, and it was a pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
For everyone that's listening, thank you for joining us, and please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you.